And welcome everybody to HR Profiles third webinar of 2016. This is the third in a series of 6 HR Profile educational webinars. We're committed to partnering with the human resources community in providing these talks to help round out your education and provide the SHRM and HRCI credits that everybody is looking for. My name is Sonia McLaughlin, and I'm the client advocate here at HR Profile. I'm your facilitator for today's webinar, and our phone number is at the chat window in the sidebar for you. If you need anything, please feel free to reach out with a phone call, or during the webinar, use the chat box or question box for any questions you have on the content. Also, I'll follow up after the webinar with some copies of information and contact information for you. Today, we're going to learn about assessing your assessments and the value of implementing an assessment program as part of your pre-employment hiring process and why you can't afford not to do this. After today's webinar, you're going to know more about the methods to identify the type of person and attributes perfect for each position that you're looking to fill. And furthermore, how to match those up with the right person to perform and succeed in the role. Also about how companies pay millions in employee turnover. You can learn how assessment programs can reduce this turnover approximately 30 to 50%. Before we get started, here's a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions during the webinar, again, please use the chat box and we'll get to them as soon as we can. At the end of the webinar, we'll go over questions and answers. If your questions don't get answered during that time, we'll definitely follow up with you. And with that, please let me go ahead and introduce our speaker. Paul Nolan is here today with us. He's the president of Personnel Profiles, Inc., a Greater Cincinnati-based human resources consulting firm. Paul has over 40 years in human resources management. His experience includes working with United Parcel Service as a human resources manager, a vice president in human resources for the Hilton-Davis Chemical Company, which is a division of Sterling Drug, Inc. Mr. Nolan's experience in HR management includes both large and small companies as well. Having a master's in training and development, Paul deeply understands that what it takes to make a great company is more than the product you produce. It's also about the people that produce it. And the best way to create that successful environment is knowing as much as you can about the people that you hire. Paul has spent the last 29 years developing personnel profiles into the strong human resource consulting firm that it is today, with multiple locations and helping small to large-scale companies, including some you may have heard of, such as Coca-Cola, Toyota, Goodwill, Federal Reserve Bank, Emerson Electric, and Siemens. These clients and more have found that the use of personnel profiles assessments has dramatically lowered their cost of recruiting. It has enhanced the quality of applicants, reduced turnover, and increased employee productivity. We are very appreciative that Paul is here today with us to share valuable information about assessments. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul.
Thank you, Sonia, for the introduction. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar. Hopefully, as we go through, you'll have some questions. And again, the big hopefully, I'll be able to answer them. As you can see from this slide, I've been in your shoes. I've been an HR manager for many years before I started Personnel Profiles. I'm not going to say I feel your pain, but I do understand some of the complexities and problems you have. I look at what's going on today with the insurance problems and getting your people insured. I look at the pending things for $15 an hour minimum wage, and that's going to cause all kinds of havoc with a lot of companies. And then just recently they came out with the new federal standards for overtime, saying that people who earn less than $47,496 need to be paid overtime. In my opinion, you're all going to be very busy. You've got a lot on your plate, and you need some help. And hopefully that's what we're here to do, is to help you through some of these problems, particularly with the most important task that you have, and that task is bringing the right people into your organization, because that's the most important task that helps build your organization for the future. I started Personnel Profiles 29 years ago because I realized that one of the important tools that I had in my arsenal as an interviewer was referencing. There was a time I could pick up the phone and call any company and go back and say, this is what Joe told me, or this is what Sally told me, and the manager would say, no, that's not exactly true. As you all know, that just doesn't work anymore. And I decided employers needed some help, so they wouldn't be dependent upon the applicant, who sometimes is a chameleon. They want to tell you what you want to hear because their game plan is to get the job. Employers need other good information, and I looked for assessment tools that could discriminate between good and bad performers. And it will vary by which tool you want to use, but again, we want to be able to say these tools help us determine who is the better employee. Again, our mission is to help companies increase their profitability. We do this by helping you determine who the best employee is and determine what the best employee looks like. Again, your competitors can buy the same equipment, they can buy the same buildings. Sooner or later, they'll get into the same technology. The difference between your company and your competition and your opportunities to grow and to stay prosperous is the quality of people that you bring on board. Here are some of the things you can expect from employment testing. Turnover is the big one there, and the fact that we usually expect with a good pre-employment testing program to bring turnover down at least 25%. I've had some cases where it's been 66%. It jumps up and down as we go through that. Within the last 30 days, I had an employer come to me and offer us an opportunity to speak before a group of self-insured employers in the state of Ohio regarding workers' comp. And while I've always known that selecting the right person can impact all these, I had no idea how much it really impacted. And when they came forward and told us that we had a 47% reduction in lost time accidents, the number of lost time accidents, and that 47% came from, they looked at the 5 years that we were doing testing, and they looked at the previous 5 years, and they found the frequency of accidents, lost time, was down 47%. Then they looked at the medical only, and again, I'm talking frequency. The frequency was down 37%. That's a significant impact. When you turn that into dollars and cents, it comes out to $1.7 million that company saved. Now, again, I have to admit that those numbers surprised me, but as they said, that's the only thing that they can attribute to the changes was the fact that we put in a pre-employment training program. So these are some of the things that you can look forward to, and as you measure your results, you want to take a look at those areas. Turnover being one of the big ones. And again, I've not been smart enough to go into companies, customers, and ask them about their workers' comp. So when this came up, it was a surprise, but you can be assured I'm going to start asking questions of companies, clients, about how their workers' comp's going and what kind of reductions they're seeing because of better selection. One of the things you need to do is you need to test the test. Now, let me tell you, there are two types of tests that I look at. I call them hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills might be, do I have an accounting degree? Do I have an engineering degree? Do I know how to operate a forklift? Do I have those talents that I need to bring to the job? Even though I may have those talents, I may be a a 4.0 accountant from one of the better schools, that doesn't mean by itself I'm going to be successful in the job, because I may have a negative attitude. I may not have the energy to get the job done. There's other factors that come in. Whatever test you're using, I'd like you to test the test. And what I mean by that is I'd like you to identify some people in your organization that are top performers, those that are you'd like to take to the copy machine and duplicate. And you want to give them the test to see if the test can discriminate and identify those people and they fall into a cluster. An example of that is a test that I use called the Bennett Mechanical Comprehension Test. I've gone into a lot of manufacturing organizations that say, oh, we've got conveyors, we've got all this moving equipment. It's important that we have good mechanical comprehension. Well, the way you find out if that's true or not, even though sometimes it sounds very logical, is you test the test. We first identify these people are people who perform well, that we really like, that they're making us money. We want more of these people. When you give them the test and you find out that some of them are terrible and some of them are very good, all that means is this test doesn't work for that situation. So whatever test you're using at any time, you want to come back and you want to test the test by finding out if it can identify the people who are good. And that goes again for the hard skills and soft skills. I'll give you a real simple example of hard skills. I was in a plant in northern Kentucky one time watching people assemble electric motors. They're putting green and red and orange wires onto this motor. And the first question that popped in my mind, do you do a colorblind test? Because you could have somebody that's a good, hard worker, great attitude, shows up for work every day, and if they're colorblind, they're not going to succeed on that job. Conversely, if they get good color vision and they tend to be lazy or they have a bad attitude, that's another problem. So you separate the soft skills and the hard skills. Let's look at some categories of tests, and we'll take a look at each one of these and try it and talk a little bit about them and their uses and where they fit and where they don't fit in the workplace for pre-employment. Intelligence tests. If intelligence tests are so critical, in our current presidential elections, we'd be giving intelligence tests to the top candidates, and whoever scores highest in the intelligence will be the one we hire. However, intelligence alone is not the criteria you need. There's more to the job than just that. There may be some jobs that you might have, particularly if you're going to do a think tank, where you need the brightest possible people into that. But sometimes some of the individuals who are that brilliant and that intelligent may have some problems with personality and being able to adapt. There's very few of these tests are used in pre-employment, but there could be some situations where you need to know the actual intelligence of an individual. In my 29 years, I haven't run into that yet, but that's a possibility that could exist. Personality tests. These are ones that are just widely used. Scoreboard, caliber, Myers-Briggs, Challenge, predictive index, discs. In addition to that, there are probably thousands and thousands of industrial psychologists that have either developed their own personality tests or out there buying some of the tests that are off the market and putting together under their name their test. The industrial psychologists, the disadvantage of them is they're very expensive, and sometimes you're looking at 6 to 8 hours of testing, and there's a number of companies that do that, but it's very expensive. But again, turnover is very expensive. When you look at just personality only, there are a number of jobs that the personality test fit perfectly for. However, many other jobs you need to combine with the mental aptitudes to be able to look at both the mental and personality between those jobs. There's job fit tests. The Achiever and the Guardian are two examples of job fit tests that go forward. These are tests that use both mental and personality characteristics to help you along those lines. They're usually a very good fit, but again, you may not need the mental scores. But when you have the mental and the personality, you have actually three pieces. You have the mental, the personality, and you have the correlation between the mental and the personality. For example, if somebody is extremely well organized but low in mental acuity, that could be somebody that's a good hourly worker who can do the job for you and be very successful. Their high organization compensation. I've done tested inmates in jail, and I found on a scale of 1 to 9, my inmates in jail, men and women, scored 1 or 2 in mental acuity. Their scores were low, primarily because of poor education, because of drugs, you name it, there's a whole list of things. And when we went to a factor called flexibility, they had low scores on flexibility, which means they didn't like to follow rules and regulations. 90% of the people were low in both flexibility and mental acuity. So it's putting that combination together to give you a third fit and give you additional information. Also, some of these job tests can be set up so it identifies individual career fields, so you have information from that standpoint. Psychological tests. For the most part, psychological tests have been used in clinical situations. MMPI is one that's very popular. It's used by a lot of police departments, social workers. However, I warn you, on the use of any of these psychological tests, you need to counsel with your attorneys to find out the legality of it. I don't remember the exact dollar amount, but Target was hit with a multi-million-dollar suit over the use of the MMPI. It was just not appropriate in the situation they're doing. So when you get into these that are designed for clinical use, you need to get some advice from probably your attorney to make sure you're not going down a road that's going to cost you lots of money. Another category is interest inventories. Interest inventories are very useful, particularly in career guidance. I've used the Strong, I've used the Career Advisor, and I'm very familiar with some of the others. What we're trying to do there is to help counsel somebody as to what kind of careers they can get into. This is used a lot in schools. It's used in outplacement firms that are trying to have somebody at outplacement to see what kind of career they can get into next. It could be used if you're having a plant closing and you're actively trying to assist the employees that are being let go to find other positions. So for one reason, so that you limit your workers' comp your unemployment exposure. Been around a long time. Very good tools, but again, there's limited use of them, and they're not useful in actually in pre-employment. Achievement educational tests. You see a lot of this in the newspaper, on TV, SAT, ACT. Again, they're designed to measure knowledge in a particular area. They're similar to intelligence tests, but they're different because it measures skill and knowledge in a particular field. And again, they're typically used in the educational institutions. Another very, very, very useful test are work sample skill tests. Again, we're dealing pretty much with the hard skills that goes on. One of them at the bottom, the NOCTI, is a company that I happen to represent. They have tests. For example, one of my customers, the Federal Reserve Bank, was trying to hire an electrician. And the HR manager said, I wouldn't have a clue who's a good electrician. I might be able, with our pre-employment test, to tell you it's a good employee, but what is their knowledge of electrical? Well, the NOCTI tests sometimes are 3 hours. They deal into, are you an electrician? Do you know heating, air conditioning, auto body repair, electronics? There's a lot of good things. There's even an accounting one that goes 3 hours into your knowledge of accounting processes. Of course, there's word processing tests, ability to weld. I mentioned the Bennett Mechanical Comprehension Test. These are tests that are looking at the hard skills. And again, for somebody to be successful in the job, they need to be able to have the hard skills so they can perform that job, and they need to have the soft skills so they're able to move forward in that. And again, whatever test you're using, remember to test it against top performers. Integrity tests. Integrity tests are sometimes called honesty tests. They're trying to find out, if, for example, the Stanton and London house, you're looking at asking questions to find out if you have a psychological propensity to be dishonest. There are some states that this is illegal to use. Massachusetts and Minnesota are two that come to mind. The assessment tests on the Achiever family are asking direct questions about have you ever, and are probably legal in every state. But before you get into doing an integrity test, you ought to get the experience of some professional to be able to tell you whether it's appropriate for what you're doing. I've had some cases where with pharmacists have been asked questions about drug, alcohol, and theft, but because they have drugs so accessible, they had an awful lot of problems hiring pharmacists because they were failing these, and probably for good reason. Now, that's a category of tests. Let's look at why should we be doing this? Again, we looked at that first, one of the early slides that talked about a reduction in turnover, reduction in workers' compensation. That's pretty good reason to get into it. But the selection process is the first point where you can impact the profitability of your company. It's the most economical point to exit marginal performers. Now, according to Forbes, there's an awful lot of expense on turnover. Forbes has said turnover can be 400% to 30 to 50%. There's all kinds of numbers on this one. If you look to the Wall Street Journal and Harvard Business Review, they'll tell you turnover cost can be 2 to 3 times the annual salary of the job. I tend to say the easy number to work with, and it's a much smaller number, is just use the annual salary of that job. Use the annual salary of that job, and when you multiply all your turnover, there's more than enough money there to justify a business case for doing pre-employment testing. Turnover is very expensive. I often said that if accountants would put turnover on the balance sheet, not only at my office, but everybody else is doing pre-employment testing, there'd be long lines of people trying to line up for that. But it's the most economical point to get rid of people who are not going to be measuring up to what you want to do. Container corporations, they say one great employee, one empowered employee, is productive as 3 good employees. Look at some other studies. Here's a fun one. The University of Chicago. The University of Chicago says that the interview is no better than the 5% better than the flip of a coin. Now, people get hired because they interview well. We all know that. I've done some studies where we've looked at the hiring process of a company, and we look at all the things that we measure, and we find out that those people that are very outgoing, that are extroverts, tend to get hired more than those people that are introverts, even though that doesn't necessarily tie back into performance. I'll give you a little test, even though I'll tell you the answer. I want you to Google behavioral interviewing. Guess how many hits you're going to get when you you hit that. Would you believe 101,000, I'm exaggerating there, 101,000 is what you're going to get. Well, let me give you just a few titles that I got on the first page. 5 keys to beating behavioral interviews. Acing the behavioral interview. Behavioral job interview tips, how to prepare and succeed. How to ace behavioral interviews from cbn.com. How to ace behavioral interviewing from NetTemps. How to pass your behavioral interviews. How to pass your behavioral interviews, YouTube. Behavioral hypothetical interview questions from the Harvard Law School. Behavioral interviewing questions, STAR interview. Behavioral interview questions and answers 101. Behavioral interview questions and answers example. I can also tell you from my experience that I've been to universities, I've been to outplacement firms, and I've watched them practice interviewing with video cameras. And they're sitting there saying, Sonia, sit up. Sonia, that was not a good answer. Sonia, you got to have better eye contact. The idea is they're teaching them how to interview better, because people get hired because they interview well. My contention is you don't want to hire people because they interview well. You want to hire them because they perform well. Let's look at another study done by Gallup, pretty good research organization. And they're talking about empowered. In other words, your top performing people. 50% are likely to have lower turnover. 56% were likely to have higher than average customer loyalty. 38% likely above average productivity. 27% are most likely to report higher productivity or profitability. Pretty good stuff when you get engaged employees. Who are these engaged employees? Well, I call it ABC. 26% are engaged, 55% are not engaged and are just putting in time, 19% are actively engaged, unhappy, and spreading their discontent. Over the years, I've always called this the ABC. The ABC, I've always said A's usually represent about 20%, but it varies by companies. B's, 60%, C's, 20%. Now, let's just say you're not rewarding the C performers for their poor performance. And the A's are looking at that and saying, why should I work so hard? When Joe's just loafing on the job, he just got a raise, or he's got the same pay I do. What's going on? Some of those numbers will drop. More often what happens is your A employee leaves, and then we look at Forbes and we say, well, that's about a 400% loss when you lose the good employees. One of the things I want you to do in your work is you identify who your top people are. You want to build that target. The target is, what do A's look like? It's hard to hit a target if you don't know what it is. So you want to identify. As you're going along, you're going to also find out what a C looks like, what you want to absolutely avoid. When we had those big savings in workers' comp, we know some of the dimensions that happen to impact that. And when you set up your system, you want to eliminate some of those people that have a propensity to get injured more and to take advantage of workers' comp. You need to know who your ABCs are. And another thing with your A's, you need to put together a succession plan, and you need to make sure, what am I doing to make sure my A's don't leave? Because losing an A can be very expensive. I oftentimes, even though I use the average salary, I will tell you that losing an A is 3 or 4 times the annual salary of that job. Losing a B, that's about average for the annual salary. That's about the right cost for that. And what happens when you lose a C? The cash register rings. You're making a profit. I'm in a round table with a group of owners of companies, and one of them owns an electrical contracting company. And when the economy crashed, he went in and looked at his ABCs, and he eliminated all his C's. Now, he was fortunate in the fact that these electricians, it's not a real large company, but a good size, all his electricians happen to be male. And they all happen to be under 40 years of age. So he was able to get rid of his C employees without having to worry about getting sued right and left. I asked him, I said, well, what did your other employees say? Oh, they said, thank you very much. We're tired of carrying those slugs. I said, how about your profitability? He said, it went through the roof. In the war for talent, they're saying, and the war for talent talks about the ABCs, you're always recruiting. When you come across an A, eliminate a C to make room for it. And you need to know, General Electric Corporation uses the ABCs. And when somebody is a C performer, they give them a couple years to straighten out, or they're going to be replaced. And when somebody asks the president, isn't that cruel and unusual? He says, no, I'm trying to help people be successful. They're not going to be successful here at General Electric. And you know what happens to most of them? They either perform a little better, which is not a big number. Most of them go someplace else where they can be A's or B's in another company. But you need to know who your strengths and who your weaknesses are, and you need to know the target so you can keep working to get more A's in the organization. Also, according to Gallup, and I'm going to change some of this to A's and C's. The chance of a C or disengaged worker having an accident on a given day are substantially higher than the A colleague. That represents a 62% more accidents in the work group in the top quartile. If you get people whose personality and mental skills match the requirement of the job, these are the people that are high performers. They are more productive, they have less accidents, and they have better attitudes towards the company. That's your job, to bring upon good employees. The conclusion of that employee engagement is the right people in the right roles. I love my job because it fits. Assessment testing, does the requirements of the job and that applicant, do they match? So you're getting people who are going to be good fits for this job. Let's look at one more study. Harvard. Harvard did a study of 360,000 people based on gender, education, age, race, and previous experience. Now, I know you're not using gender. I know you're not using age and race. But when I look at education and previous experience, that's how I was initially trained. I'm picking up a resume and application. I'm looking at their previous experience and their education. And then those are the people that I'm trying to bring in. But Harvard said the only factor that mattered was how they fit the job. Now, keep in mind, it's not just the personality test. We're looking at somebody who's got the hard skills. This is an accountant. Does this accountant have the hard skills at technical college to do this job? And then how well do they fit it? So Harvard's coming back and saying how well they fit the job is the factor that's important. Here's an example of one of the tests that I use. And I'm using this example from one I use because I'm not allowed to use my competitors. They won't let me talk about their tests. First of all, I wouldn't be that qualified to do that and be able to get that done. So here we've got an instrument that's looking at, for example, mental acuity. And we're saying 5 to 7 is our benchmark. This is where our top employees are going to score. This person scored a 4. I'm not necessarily going to reject them for that, but I know this is a flashing light. I need to take a look at it. But you can look at a glance at this and see that this candidate is not a good fit for this job. They're out in more brackets than any. From a technical standpoint, I can tell you the score in energy, emotional development, and mental toughness tells me this is a high energy person who folds under pressure. Hopefully, whatever test you're using is able to give you some benchmarks that you can set some standards and saying, here's where I want my good employees to fall. And you're comparing your applicants against your good employees so you know what your target is and you have a good idea where you're going forward. Here's a suggested hiring system. I put this together probably about 28 years ago, and it talks with the first interview. You do your assessment testing, and then you bring them in for the second interview, and then you do background checks, drug testing, and now I've got my best candidate. What's the training plan to get Sonia from being star applicant to star employee? Now, technology has changed, and we've added a new tool that I'm just going to talk briefly about. It's called Applicant Management Systems, and there's lots of them out there. I don't care which one you use. If you're not using an applicant management system, start shopping and look for one, because it allows you to, first of all, put out a job description so the applicant knows exactly what they're applying for, and it's done online. So as I read that job description, I can go away if I want to. And sometimes I suggest, if it's appropriate, put wages and benefits on there so you're not wasting your time or the applicant's time. You can also, at the end of it, you can add pre-screen questions. So pre-screen questions are going to help you determine, does this candidate have the hard skills to perform this job? And then you can add assessment testing. Now, this company that had this great reduction in turnover, and by the way, the reduction in turnover was only 42% over this 5-year period. What did they do? Well, they put together an applicant management system, and we work with a number of them, and your background checking company or your employment testing company can help you do this. You want to have it put together so that it identifies those people who meet the hard skills and you're looking at their assessment test, and you've got all this information in your hands, and you can decide immediately, do I want to bring this candidate in for testing? If you put something like this together, the people you're selecting in this company that had this great reduction, they're only interviewing people who match the requirements for the job. The system is able to line them up, and a lot of these applicant management systems can do that for you. They're going to line up applicants saying, these are the ones that fit the profile that you're looking for. These are the ones I want to spend time with, and conversely, it'll take those that you don't want to spend time with. Always believe very strongly in background checks, and I can tell you from experience, testing inmates in jail, some of them look pretty good. And I said, you know, if I had these folks in my lobby right now, I'd say I got a good applicant pool. And some of them, not many, but some of them tested quite well. But they got drug problems that cause them to steal. They got all kinds of problems. If you're not using all the pieces of this pie, you're going to get in trouble. So we want to get into interviewing only the top candidates, do a background check, do the drug testing, and then put together a training program that helps you take this from star applicant to star employee. Now it's your time to ask me some questions. Do we have any?
Yeah, let's see. Thank you, Paul. That was really fascinating, and I'm sure today's attendees will take a second to look at this step and see how they can implement assessment programs and find the right people for their jobs. We do have time now for some questions. If you haven't already asked it, go on and pop your question in the question box. And looks like I've got a few here. All right. Ready, Paul?
Yep.
Okay. So when should a company start the process of identifying what traits they want to find in a candidate?
They should do that before they start hiring. If you've got good employees that are working there, test some of them and find out how they look like. If not, we start with the job description. And from that job description, we try to identify what are the characteristics you're looking for. But you do that in advance before you go out, because the problem is you're going to bring somebody in and you're going to like them and the halo effect's going on, and you're going to hire somebody because they have to interview well, and that's just the wrong reason to do that.
Okay, thank you. That sounds like very good advice. Another question, how long does testing take? I guess assessment testing, right?
Well, that's going to vary. I mean, we've got some that run from 10 minutes. And if you get it an octi test, it's 3 hours. More likely, I'd say half hour to an hour is more typical what you're going to get into. But they all vary. It depends on the requirements of that job.
Thank you. All righty. How about, do the applicants see the results?
Typically, the results should be treated just like your interview notes. They're confidential. There is a number of companies that we work with that are taking the approach that when I hire Sonia and bring her on board, I want to sit her down and show her the results. First of all, tell her that she did well because we hired her, and we want to help you be successful. So here are some of the areas that we think you probably need to work on, and your supervisor or the HR department is going to help you be successful doing that. Companies that do that have had some remarkable success.
Okay, great. So how many applicants usually are eliminated based on assessments versus interview performance?
Well, that's a tough one. I'm not sure I can give you a great answer to that one. You're probably going to eliminate about 20 to 30% of your applicants based on the target you got set. But more importantly, you're probably going to have about 20% of your applicants that are going to be identified as A performers, those people that I want to talk to first. And typically, you'll find a great employee there. A good example is something one of my clients told me, and I'm sure other testing companies will tell you the same story. And this was from a president of a company in northern Kentucky. And she said years ago, we had 2 candidates for a job. This very attractive young lady for an estimator that everybody wanted me to hire. And we had this punk kid who was a little bit overweight, had blue and red stripes in his hair, and he didn't interview very well. But based on the test results, she said, you argued with me and said, don't hire the girl, hire the guy. Well, this has probably been about 15, 20 years later. She said, today he's running the plant. People get hired because they interview well. You want to hire people because they're a good job fit and they're going to perform well.
Excellent. That's a great story. Yeah.
It's one that she tells quite often around, and other people had heard it before I did.
Wow. We've got a few more questions. It looks like we still have some time. You good with that, Paul?
Yes.
All right. So is assessment testing legal? Or are there different laws in different states on this?
Well, there's different laws, different states, but personality testing has been found to be successful or legal. I can tell you the instruments that we use, particularly the Achiever, in the 50-year history has never had a successful challenge or settlement by the manufacturer or any of the users of it. Again, if you're doing your work right and you have tested it, you've done concurrent validation, you said, this test can discriminate between my good and bad performers. I'll give you a good example. I mentioned the Bennett Mechanical Comprehension. Let's give that to all your good administrative assistants. You're probably going to find the majority of them are going to score low in that. And that's telling you that that test should not be used in that environment. If you're testing the test and you're saying this test can discriminate between good and bad employees, then you have nothing to worry about.
Excellent. So here's another one. If we already have an applicant tracking system in place, how long does it take to set up and integrate with assessment testing? How to go about doing that?
That would, well, I can't speak to how long it would take because I don't know what your applicant management system is, but typically that works kind of quick. I mean, even Charlie or any of our competitors, they can merge those things in and blend it in. You just need to put the whole piece together. Doing an applicant management system and tying your testing together makes life simpler for you. Let's, for example, say you ran an ad on Career Builders and you come in on Monday morning and you're lucky. You got 100 applicants there for that job. Well, in just a few clicks, you can identify from the pre-screen question who's qualified from the hard skills. From a few clicks, you can take a look at the soft skills, the test, and see who's qualified there. And you're only bringing in people to interview who meet your qualifications. You're saving yourself lots of time, you're saving yourself exposure, and you're doing a better job with less effort. And I kind of like doing it that way. Excellent.
Let's see, here's one. You mentioned in the war for talent, you're always recruiting. Is that a book or is it the general philosophy?
Well, it's a book, and it was very popular until Enron came up because the authors were big high on Enron. If you can forget about the Enron, it's an excellent article, but it talks about the ABCs. And the ABCs, they go back a long way. There's a quote from Winston Churchill. I may not have it exactly right. Never in the course of history has so much been owed by so many to so few. It was a very famous speech by Winston Churchill. And what he was talking about is in the battle for Britain, when Germany was invading in the 40s, bombing England, England decided to take their pilots, and they didn't have that many, and they broke them down into 3 categories. A, people who were very talented and be squadron leaders. B, those people who could follow the squadron leaders. And C, those people you kept on the ground. So when he made that famous speech, he was talking about the ABCs. So this is not a new philosophy. It's just taking a look, and Gallup is doing the same thing. They don't call it ABC, they call it empowered. But it's your top people and knowing who they are and working off of that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's see. Looks like we've got one last question. Are there main success indicator traits across the board to identify in addition to job-specific traits?
Yes, but I mean, I can tell you from the terminology that we use. I can't tell you the terminology of my competitors, but they can certainly tell you that too. Again, oftentimes say, I don't care whose test you're using. I'd like you to use mine, but I don't care whose test you're using. The important thing is you recognize the fact that some applicants are chameleons. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. If I'm looking for a successful outside salesperson, I'm looking for somebody who's got good mental skills. Their organizational score happens to be low because they're more people-oriented. They happen to be very outgoing. They're assertive, competitive, and they're motivated, high motivation. Some of my competitors might have different terms, but they're probably going to be looking at the same thing. But yeah, you'll be able to find, particularly as you do your workforce study, and you're identifying what my target is, you can go forward there. But you really need to know what the target is. What's a successful welder look like? What's a successful accountant look like? I can tell you, a successful accountant, a successful salesperson, they don't look at it, well, they both may be bright, but on the personality, there's significant difference because it's what is necessary for success in an occupation.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, so that's our last question at this time. If anybody else has any follow-up questions, please reach out and we'll be sure to get them answered for you. Paul, thanks for your insights today, and everybody online with us, we appreciate you joining us. Paul's contact information is on the presentation, and I'll send it to you afterwards with your certificates for your SHRM and your HRCI credits, plus the slides and links to the video and our upcoming webinars where you can go ahead and register. I want to be sure to convey, as we're concluding, that on top of lining up these great webinars for you and continuing education credits, it's my job to make sure that there's no question in your mind that HR Profile is a valuable resource for you as one of the nation's preeminent consumer reporting agencies, providing for you thorough and high-quality background checks and employment screening services. Don't forget to register for our next presentation in our series. Plan to join us Wednesday, July 20th, when Jackie Messersmith, founding partner of Talent Management, LLC, will present What's Trending in Talent Management. Please don't hesitate to call me directly if you have any additional questions. And lastly, on behalf of all of us here at HR Profile, a big thank you to Paul from Personnel Profiles, and thank you to all attendees for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.